My name's George, and I work as a police officer at the Emergency Communications Center in Shenandoah County, Virginia, right in Strasburg. It's not exactly the dream job I had in mind growing up. I actually wanted to get into acting after college, even auditioned for some TV shows and movies, but nothing ever panned out. So here I am, wearing a badge instead of being on screen. Most of the time it's pretty standard stuff. Nothing too crazy, just writing reports, responding to calls, dealing with the occasional drunk guy yelling nonsense in a parking lot. But there was this one night in December that completely threw me. It was just about midnight when a call came through about a woman causing a scene at one of the Ramada hotels. Apparently she was breaking things and yelling at people in the parking lot. I got sent to check it out, thinking it'd be a quick in-and-out situation. When I pulled up, I saw her right away, barefoot, pacing around, and clutching something in her hand that definitely didn't belong to her. I tried calling out to her calmly, letting her know she wasn't in any immediate danger and that I just wanted to talk. But she was all over the place, talking fast, not making a ton of sense, and clearly out of it. She asked if I was going to take her to jail, and before I could even answer, she lunged at me out of nowhere. I tried to grab hold of her to calm her down, but she slipped right out of my grip and took off running. I chased her, pulled out my taser, and lost sight of her for a second before she popped out from behind a dumpster, like it was some kind of horror movie scene. I kept going after her, but being real, I'm not in the best shape. I was already winded, and she was way faster than me. Eventually, we ended up back where my cruiser was parked. That's when things escalated even more. She ran at me again, completely ignoring my commands to stop. I kept yelling that I didn't want to hurt her, but she started swinging at me. I fired my taser, not once, but twice, and both times, it just didn't do anything. At that point, things got physical fast. She yanked the radio receiver off my shoulder, and in the chaos, we both ended up on the ground. Her pants fell down mid-scuffle, which was just another surreal part of this whole mess. Then, she started wrapping the radio cord around my neck, trying to choke me out. I panicked. I reached for my baton and swung at her leg to get her off me, but she somehow grabbed it from me and cracked me in the head with it. I staggered back, and in that brief second of separation, I knew I had to protect myself. I pulled out my firearm, still shouting at her to stop, begging her not to make me do it, but she kept coming. I fired 4 shots straight into her chest. She dropped. At first, she moved a bit, but then she just stopped altogether. I kept yelling at her, hoping she'd still respond somehow, but she didn't. I radioed for backup right away, and when the other officers got there, I completely broke down. I kept repeating, "Why'd she make me do that?" over and over. I never wanted it to end like that. I didn't sign up to take a life. I just didn't want to lose mine that night. One of the other officers, David, rushed to try and save her. He did CPR on her for what felt like forever, around 6.5 minutes, while we waited for paramedics to arrive. They eventually did, and she was taken to the hospital, but she didn't make it. Her name was Melissa Tompkins. She was 40, homeless, severely mentally ill, and addicted to meth. I'm still working at that same communications center, and thankfully, I haven't faced anything close to that night since. But it's something that sticks with you. You never really walk away from something like that the same. So this happened on April 16th, 2022, and it's honestly one of the worst days of my life. My grandma, who was 75 at the time and battling pretty serious dementia, had a complete mental breakdown that night. I'd seen her have rough days before, moments where she'd be confused or agitated. But this was something else entirely. She was pacing around, saying things that didn't make sense, and eventually she grabbed a kitchen knife, which completely terrified us. None of us, me, my mom, or my sister, knew how to handle it properly, and we definitely aren't medical professionals, so we figured the safest thing to do was to call 911. An officer showed up around 6:45 in the evening. We were all already waiting near the front door when we heard him knock and call out, "Police department, can you step out for me?" I remember telling him to be careful before we opened the door. We thought he'd come in calmly and try to talk her down. Instead, the first thing out of his mouth when he spotted her was yelling for her to drop the knife, and it all spiraled from there. He didn't try to de-escalate at all. He just kept yelling and pointing his weapon at her while she stood there, clearly confused and overwhelmed. None of us dared step in. We didn't want to get arrested or make things worse. But it felt so wrong watching him escalate everything. From where we were standing, it was obvious he had no idea how to handle someone with a mental illness. My grandma wasn't charging him or anything, but he had his gun locked on her like she was some kind of threat to national security. Then, just like that, he fired twice. We heard the shots, then this heavy, horrible sound as her body hit the floor. All of us just broke. My mom lost it, started screaming, and I was in total shock. More officers showed up seconds later, and while some of them tried CPR, the one who fired his gun casually walked through the house like it was just another day at work. When he came back outside, you could feel the rage building. My mom had to be held back because she was about to go off on him. And honestly, I don't blame her. Despite everything, my grandma didn't make it. She died shortly after from her wounds. Just like that, she was gone. The worst part? The officer who shot her didn't face any charges. The district attorney reviewed it and decided not to prosecute. And a couple of months later, the guy was back on duty like nothing ever happened. Our family was beyond angry. We ended up filing a lawsuit against the city, and after a long, painful process, they agreed to a $3 million settlement. It didn't bring my grandma back, though. That pain doesn't go away. It's been almost 3 years, and I still think about that night all the time. I can still see it in my head like it just happened yesterday. I've been working as a cop here in Montana for most of my life. Still am, actually. If I'm being honest, it was never something I dreamed of doing. It was just one of those, well, I need a job, and college isn't happening situations. Over the years, people have had all kinds of opinions about cops, especially during 2020, when tensions were sky high with protests and all the ACAB signs. That was probably one of the hardest stretches of my career. But even before all that, something happened that really messed with me on a whole different level. Something I still think about way too often. This goes back to April 2014. I was working the night shift when I noticed this red sedan swerving like crazy, almost sideswiped my patrol car. It was late, I was tired, and I wasn't in the mood to deal with someone being reckless. I pulled the car over, walked up to the window while a couple of other officers stayed back in the cruiser. I saw 4 people in the car. I told them all to put their hands up, which they did, but the driver stood out to me. He was visibly shaking. I asked for his name, and he told me it was Richard. That name instantly rang a bell because there had been a robbery and shooting the night before, and one of the suspects was named Richard Ramirez. Same name, same general description. As soon as I made that connection, I radioed in for more units. Right after I did that, I saw Richard start reaching for something in his pocket. I panicked. I pulled my gun and yelled for him to freeze, told him to keep his hands up or I'd shoot. But he didn't stop. He kept reaching, and I assumed he had a gun. So I fired. He dropped immediately but was still alive, just barely hanging on. I kept everyone else in the car at gunpoint and called in that shots had been fired. 2 of the other passengers got out, laid flat on the pavement like I told them to, and were cuffed without incident. Once backup arrived and the situation calmed down, I finally approached the car to check on Richard. That's when things really hit me. He wasn't breathing. I reached into his pocket, expecting to find a weapon, but all I pulled out was a small bag of meth. That's it. Just drugs, not a gun. I completely broke down right there in front of one of the other squad cars. I don't even remember what I said, but I know I couldn't stop crying. Another officer had to come over and try to console me. Later, Richard's family sued me, said I overreacted, used excessive force. I ended up going through a trial, but the judge ended up clearing me of all charges. Still, that didn't stop strangers online from sending me death threats or calling me a murderer. I did my best to ignore all of it, but the guilt, that never really went away. My coworkers never treated me differently, though, which helped a little. I've managed to get back into a normal rhythm in life since then. But that night, that decision, it sticks with me. It's the kind of thing that follows you around forever. This happened about a year ago, late one night while I was on patrol in Tennessee. I spotted this car driving in the wrong lane, swerving a bit, and it was just one of those things where you instantly know you've got to stop them before something worse happens. So I pulled the guy over, and as I walked up to the vehicle, I could see it was a young black man with dreadlocks. I asked him to pull into the nearest driveway so we weren't blocking the road, and he did, no problem. Once we were safely off to the side, I approached again and introduced myself. Told him I worked with the county sheriff's office, and that I stopped him because his driving was all over the place. He immediately started apologizing, saying something about fixing his hair, which sounded like a weak excuse. I asked him if he'd been drinking or using anything, and he insisted he hadn't touched anything. No booze, no weed, nothing. But the inside of his car told a different story. The smell of weed was pretty strong, so I asked for his license and registration. He said the car was his mom's, which I verified when I ran his info, and saw everything checked out under the name Kenneth DeHart. Just to be safe, I called for backup before moving forward, because I could tell this situation wasn't going to stay calm for long. When I came back to the car, I asked him to step out since the smell was enough to investigate further. He kept pushing back, saying he didn't smoke, and even told me I refused the search. I almost laughed at how confident he sounded, but I calmly let him know that wasn't really how things worked in this case. We went back and forth for a few minutes until my partner Greg showed up. Greg didn't waste any time. He could tell I was dealing with someone being difficult, so he stepped up and told Kenneth plainly, "Get out of the car, or you're going to jail." At that point, things went downhill fast. I tried opening the door, and Kenneth slammed it shut. Greg stepped in and got it open again, and we both tried pulling him out, but he started resisting hard. He kept saying we weren't allowed to do this, and it was clear he wasn't coming quietly. Greg pulled out his taser and warned him multiple times, but Kenneth just ignored him. So Greg finally used the taser. It didn't stop Kenneth. He actually closed the door again, so Greg tased him a second time. That time, Kenneth screamed, and Greg told me to unbuckle his seatbelt so we could get him out. It wasn't easy. The guy was strong and fighting back, and while I was trying to unbuckle him, Greg had to tase him a third time. That's when things got even worse. During the struggle, I got zapped by the taser too. I backed off, hurting, and as I looked back at the car, I saw Kenneth roll the window up, and then I saw it. A gun in his hand. Before we could react, he shot Greg twice, then turned and shot me in the leg. I stumbled away, shouting in pain, trying to make it back to the squad car as Kenneth drove off. Even while bleeding, I managed to pull out my gun and fired several shots at the fleeing vehicle. I called for immediate backup, reporting that I'd been shot. As I looked back, I saw Kenneth shoot Greg one last time while driving away. A few people who had stopped nearby heard me yelling for help and thankfully ran over without hesitation. I was calling out Greg's name, but there was no response. A woman helped me into her car and just stayed with me while I tried to catch my breath and process what had just happened. More officers arrived shortly after. They helped me into one of their vehicles and got me to the hospital. Meanwhile, others stayed behind to try and help Greg, but it was too late. There was nothing anyone could do for him. At the hospital, they patched me up. Kenneth was on the run, and for 5 long days, there was a manhunt going on. Eventually, they found Kenneth hiding out in an apartment about 20 miles from where it all happened. He was taken into custody and charged with a whole list of serious offenses, including first-degree murder, attempted murder, aggravated assault, and resisting arrest. The DA is going for the death penalty, and his trial's scheduled for April of next year. Losing Greg, It's something that never leaves me. He wasn't just a partner. He was my friend, my brother in uniform, and he gave his life to protect mine. I didn't get the chance to thank him, and that hurts the most. I'm still doing this job because I know he'd want me to keep going, even when it's hard. I've got a long way to go in healing, but I'm taking it one step at a time. Greg, wherever you are, I miss you, man, and I'll see you again someday. I've been in law enforcement since right after college, got my degree, landed the job pretty quick, and have been doing it ever since. After nearly 20 years of working the streets, I finally got promoted to deputy, which honestly came with more pressure than perks. The calls got heavier, the situations more intense, and the people I had to deal with, a lot more unpredictable. One of the craziest moments I've ever had on duty happened last year, and it's still something I think about all the time. It was October 16th, 2023, a little after 7:30 in the morning. I was cruising along the interstate in Camden County, Georgia, when this white pickup truck flew past me doing at least 100. I immediately flipped on my lights, pulled him over, and got on the speaker, telling him to step out of the truck. I had all the windows down and was practically shouting into the speaker, repeating myself over and over, but the guy just sat there, ignoring everything. Frustrated, I finally stepped out and started yelling directly. No speaker, just me and my voice. That finally got his attention. He got out, clearly irritated, and as I told him to turn around and put his hands behind his back, he snapped, "I ain't doing shit." I put my hand on his shoulder, hoping he'd come to his senses, but instead he flinched and jerked away. I gave him another clear warning, either comply or I'd use my taser. That got him moving, but only halfway. He walked to the back of his truck, but still refused to put his hands behind his back. I told him again, "Do it now, or you're getting tased." He questioned me, asking why, and I explained he was under arrest for reckless driving and excessive speed. He argued back, saying no one got hurt, and that it should just be a ticket. I told him in Georgia, those tickets can be considered criminal offenses, and that this wasn't just a simple traffic stop anymore. He kept pushing, so I hit him with the taser, but even then, he barely reacted. He stayed upright, and even started walking toward me while the taser was still buzzing. Then things got out of hand fast. He reached for the taser, grabbed it, and we ended up grappling like we were in a wrestling match. He grabbed my throat and face, and I had no choice but to reach for my baton and use it just to defend myself. He kept shouting and clawing at me, and in that moment, something in me snapped. I pulled out my firearm and fired a single shot into his chest. He dropped instantly, but I stayed on alert. I told him repeatedly to stay down while I called for backup on the radio. Even after being hit, he was still trying to move. He got onto his hands and knees like he was going to get back up. I kept giving him verbal commands, telling him not to move, but eventually, his body gave out, and he dropped flat to the pavement. A second unit pulled up shortly after, and one of the other officers came running over, asking if I was okay. I nodded, still winded and in shock. I cuffed the guy, but he wasn't responsive at all. A few more cruisers and an ambulance showed up, and while the paramedics worked on him, I staggered back toward my car, totally drained. I collapsed against the trunk, struggling to even breathe. And that's when the emotions hit me. I broke down crying, surrounded by my team. They stayed with me, gave me a moment to collect myself, and eventually, I went back to the station. The sheriff saw what kind of shape I was in and gave me the rest of the day and the next one off. But honestly, the weeks that followed were brutal. I found out the guy I shot was named Leonard Cure, and he had spent 16 years behind bars for a crime he didn't commit. Learning that, it just broke something inside me. He had already been through hell, and I can't imagine the trauma he carried. No wonder he reacted the way he did when I tried to arrest him. He probably thought he was heading right back to a place he'd fought so hard to escape. A few months later, Leonard's family filed a federal lawsuit against the department and me, claiming I used excessive and deadly force. And honestly, a part of me gets it. I didn't know his story. Didn't know what he'd been through, and maybe if I had, I would have approached it differently. On February 25, 2025, the district attorney announced I wouldn't face any criminal charges for Leonard's death. I thanked God for that. I was relieved, yeah, but that didn't make the pain go away. I still think about Leonard all the time and pray he found peace wherever he is. I just hope he knows I never meant for any of this to happen. This happened in October of 2024. It was about 1 a.m, and we got called out to this house in Bridgeport, Connecticut about a guy acting out of control, possibly dangerous. I showed up with a few other officers, and we headed up to the front door to check things out. One of the guys on our team knocked, and 2 men eventually came to the door, both black, one bald, the other wearing a round, kind of stylish hat. But they didn't say a word, just stood there quietly behind the glass. We knocked again, and this time I asked the guy with the hat to unlock the door. He turned away without saying anything, kind of blocking the other guy behind him, like he didn't want him to get to the door. That instantly set off some alarms for me. I pulled out the little pocket knife I always keep on me during shifts and tried to jimmy the lock since the situation was starting to feel weird, but I couldn't get it open. Thankfully, the bald guy managed to squeeze around the other man and unlock the door from the inside. What happened next happened so fast it still feels like a blur. As the door creaked open, the guy with the hat didn't even wait for anyone to say a word. He suddenly stormed outside toward me, and without hesitation, he looked right at me and said, "I'm going to fucking kill you." Then, out of nowhere, he pulled a blade from his coat pocket and lunged. I felt the knife jam into my shoulder, then rip out just as quickly. I didn't even have time to react before he stabbed me again, this time in the neck, and everything in me just shut down. My voice disappeared, I couldn't breathe, and before I knew it, he plunged the blade into my head too. I was fading fast. With what little strength I had left, I shoved him off me and stumbled off the porch, barely able to see or stand. My eyes drifted down to the grass below me, and I just focused on the color, trying to stay conscious. I remember hearing 2 loud gunshots, followed by all the other officers shouting commands. "Drop the knife! Put it down!" over and over, for what felt like forever. Medics showed up right around that time and rushed in to help. I ended up in the hospital for 4 days, barely hanging on at first, but eventually pulling through. The guy who attacked me took 2 bullets to the spine. He survived, but now he's paralyzed from the waist down and waiting for his trial in county jail. I'm not going to lie, that night shook me to my core. I came so close to dying that I still get chills thinking about it. But by some miracle, the doctors managed to save me, and I'm back on my feet, still in uniform, still doing the job, and not planning on quitting anytime soon.